Hello and welcome to the latest in the Leaders with Ambition podcast series. And today I am delighted to welcome my guest, Eddie Bowman. Eddie has his own consulting firm, having recently completed his role as partner, business development marketing director at Simmons & Simmons. And today it's going to be a really interesting, insightful conversation. We'll talk about Eddie's early career, and he's worked his way through the world of advertising, through to finding a passion for professional services firms, embracing the change of working in a creative environment to a more structured partnership environment, which has presented its own challenges, and really to look at how over time his strengths, his emotional intelligence, and the piece around the relationship management side that I think has always been very close to Eddie's heart, has really helped him move from being a manager to an inspirational leader. And there's lots of people out there that know Eddie, and I know that that's one of the comments that they always make about you, Eddie, so it'll be interesting to hear more about the reasons why. So without further ado, Eddie, over to you to bring your career to life for us.
Oh my God. Yes, well, we'll start. Shall we go back a bit?
Let's go back, yes.
Okay. So, well, actually, my childhood is obviously, in hindsight, incredibly privileged, actually, and secure, and there was money. I feel incredibly lucky, particularly given what's going on in the world today. I mean, there were a few rocks in the road, but I had a lovely time, actually. Pottled through school, developed a passion for travel and motorbikes really early. And I think when I was 14 or 15, the first time I went away in the school holidays, and I worked in a Wimpy bar in Brussels. You probably didn't know there were Wimpy bars in Brussels, but there were back in the day.
There's not many in the UK anymore, I don't think.
No, but there were then. And I then just continued to travel, mainly on a motorbike, and sort of slightly drifted through school. I think I was never a great academic, I don't think. But I had a lovely time. Actually, it was great. Yeah. Really enjoyed it.
So what made you then decide, and at what stage did you decide that you were going to follow this professional career? Because you wanted to go to university. That was something that was fixed in your mind as a way of getting you to London, wasn't it?
No, well, I mean, I just sort of thought I'd go to university, and I did go to university. And actually, I loved university, but I worked out really early on that you're only at university 6 months of the year. So that gives you 6 months of the year to do other stuff. And I had a motorbike, and I used to work doing pretty mundane jobs for bits of the time when I wasn't at university. And then I would just get on my bike and go and travel. And that was a real passion. And so university was, I mean, it sounds terrible, but I just sort of assumed I'd go there, and I did go there, and I had a good time. I didn't do any work. But I enjoyed myself immensely. So
you then came to London, and you started to look for roles through the Milk Round. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, I did. I don't know whether the Milk Round still exists, but in those days it was really easy. You just sort of were spoon-fed jobs, I think, or spoon-fed opportunities. I was lucky enough to be offered some jobs, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I took a job. God, I mean, I feel embarrassed to say it now. I took a job in an oil company called Esso, and lasted a year there. I had this mad plan that what I was going to do was I was going to do a different job in a different sector every 18 months until I was 30, and then decide what I was going to do. It didn't really work out like that, but I spent a year at Esso. I started off life with them in London, and they moved me quite predictably to an oil refinery, actually near Southampton, and I just needed to get back to London, so I left. And I suppose I left after about a year or 18 months, and joined Saatchi, or a sort of outpost of Saatchi, which I don't think I was very good at, actually, to start with. I was only there about 18 months. I think I probably felt that I was so arrogant in those days. I think I felt I could skip the mundane bit to get on to the more interesting bit, and I didn't quite understand why I had to go through the mundane bit. So I did that again for about 18 months, and then I left.
Yeah, so you joined Ogilvy and Mather, and was
Yes.
that again? That was because it was for the role, or was it for the company itself?
Well, I mean, Ogilvy now in the UK is probably slightly of a lesser institution than it was, when I was there. Not because of me, I hasten to add, but I mean, advertising in those days was a really, really exciting, perceived to be a really exciting place to be. Ogilvy was one of the best premier organizations in the land, and so I was offered a job, and I just had to take it. And actually, I loved it for most of my time there. It was great.
And I know there's lots of stories that you gained during your time there, which I'm sure people will be able to ask you about when they bump into you. There's lots of interesting stories.
Yes. What I would say, actually, I mean, the only thing I'd say that I think is of interest for today's debate is that in some ways, Ogilvy and the advertising industry in the last century had got some of the diversity stuff quite right, actually. We were split 50-50 male, female. Most of my bosses were women. It was also a fantastic eclectic mix of different socioeconomic backgrounds. There's a real melting pot of different types of people. And I look back on it now and the debate that we're having today, and in some ways they were slightly ahead of their time, actually. I mean, there were things that went on there that you wouldn't want to hear about today and would not be acceptable today, but probably not for this podcast.
And you worked with some real key clients, didn't you? FMCG clients, and starting off in that client services role and really building and changing how client services worked. It was I think a really interesting period of time for you, but it was also very formative in the way that you subsequently went on to develop your style.
Yes. I mean, it was a great industry then, and I think it's becoming a great industry again. It had a bit in the middle where it was in the doldrums, but yes, I worked with masses of really, really interesting different types of business, FMCG, but also business to business organizations, a lot of technology organizations, which people that know me will laugh because I'm such a technophobe. And in the end, I ran the client services function, so I was responsible in some way or another for all of them, and I loved it. I loved the creative environment that an advertising agency was in those days. Wonderful personalities, slightly bonkers, but absolutely wonderful personalities that did crazy things and were allowed to get away with it,
Yeah. And you became a main board director by the age of 30, which, if thinking about, as you said earlier, you were planning on doing this, moving every 18 months to find something different.
Yes.
So that wasn't an aim for you necessarily. How did that come about, and how did was your sense of achievement and goals really, did you feel like you'd achieved something great?
I didn't, actually. I mean, I didn't have time. I think Elton John said, I've got to give myself time to smell the roses. I was certainly I didn't have time. I've always suffered from imposter syndrome, so I wasn't quite sure I was any good. So I was sort of climbing up the greasy pole. I mean, look, you have to say that it was a very young people's profession or sector, and I wasn't alone in getting on the board by the time I was 30. I mean, Ogilvy then was the second largest agency in the UK, so it was quite a big responsibility, and I had a team of difficult, challenging people working for me. But I didn't really get a sense of achievement. I wasn't particularly comfortable in my skin in those days, and it was quite a stressful job. And by the time I got to the top of the organization, I was not enjoying it. If I'm honest, I think I was just a bit too young to do the job I was doing. I hadn't been around the block.
Yeah, it was a big job as well, wasn't it? I remember you saying,
Yeah, it was a big job.
And so you decided you wanted to do something else. You've
Yeah.
obviously got to this stage, as you say, you weren't enjoying it as much as you probably wanted to. And so you decided to go into the professional services
Yeah.
field.
Yes. Yes.
In
Why
the
did I
Big
do
Four.
that? Yes.
Yeah.
Why the hell did I do that? I don't really know. Well, I mean, I got to a point, I was the sort of number two in a way within, the London office of Ogilvy. And I think you either have to go and set up an agency or go and run an agency or run the agency I was in. And I was pretty clear, I don't think I was ready to do that. I don't think I was good enough, frankly. And also, it's a terrible cliche, but I felt I needed to go and do something new and different. So I went to INSEAD actually as a sort of stepping stone that gave me opportunity to go somewhere else. And my first step into professional services was pretty awful, if I'm honest. I didn't enjoy myself very much.
But it didn't stop you continuing.
No.
Yeah.
The definition of madness, I think, is once you've tried something you don't like to carry on doing it. So I just
carry
carried on. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, I was at KPMG. It was a revenue generating role. So I was selling into the likes of WPP, Omnicom, Dentsu, back office services to help the efficiency of their back office. But my challenge was the whole, the integration into an enormous partnership culture from a smaller entrepreneurial creative environment was really hard.
Yeah, that's a massive step, isn't it?
Oh my
It really
God.
is.
Yeah, really hard. So it took me a while to find any sense of equilibrium. And in fact, fortune struck because I was headhunted by what was then the biggest of what was then the Big Five, by Anderson.
Yeah.
And it was just, it looked like an amazing opportunity. They made me a partner to run their UK marketing function, and it was brilliant. It was just an extraordinary organization. You could smell the culture as you walk through the door, and it's a great sense that you could do anything. If you put your mind to it, you could do anything. And I was only there for a couple of years, largely because a little thing called Enron came along and whacked 85,000 people out of a job in a warp speed. But it was a fantastic experience, and the people there were extraordinary, and they gave me,
like you say, a great place to work and learn.
Just amazing
stuff that happened.
Yeah.
And so would you have stayed there longer? Was that, because again, I know that you like to think about where your next step and how you continue to do your personal and professional development. Do you think that would have been a longer term role for you?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I think you can't, in most circumstances, if you're not somewhere for at least 3 or 4 years, there's not that much you can do, I don't think, in less than 3 or 4 years. You can shuffle around the organization but I don't think you can deliver anything of lasting value. And I was at Ogilvy for 13 years, so I can be a stayer. I can be. I mean, to be truthful, I hated KPMG, and I'm very pleased I got out of it. I don't want to be rude about KPMG. It's a wonderful organization, but it wasn't for me.
It wasn't the right opportunity for you.
No.
So you then moved on to EY. So you are sticking with your Big Four here.
Yes. Very different role. So the Anderson role was UK only. The EY role was effectively the chief marketing officer for the whole of EY. And the scale of these organizations, for those that haven't worked in them, is just mind-boggling. I think now they're about a $30 billion revenue organization. When I was there, they were a $23 or $24 billion revenue organization, 200,000 people, 150 countries. And technically, I had every marketing individual around the EY world, as part of my team, which is about 2,500 people.
Huge remit, Eddie.
Awful. I was completely incapable of doing the job, let's be honest. And the organization just was not set up to make it easy for me. You know, it was still very much an organization driven by geography, and the global overlay was wafer thin. So I had responsibility without a lot of authority. So I certainly learnt the art of persuasion and the art of managing, getting people aligned behind ideas that they had no compulsion to adopt. I certainly learned a lot about that.
Do you think that's when also then you did the management piece, as you and I talked about previously, is you start managing, you don't really know what you're doing when you're a manager. You may have had some training, but the practical element is so different, isn't it? You then start to learn the skill, you make some mistakes, you hopefully learn from those mistakes. But as you've mentioned to me about then transitioning into being a leader, was that during that period of time? Because if you're pulling all of these different countries together and different cultures and different ways of thinking behind a common goal, there's got to be a skill set there that's above and beyond the managing role.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think a couple of points. I think my views on what it is to be a leader have fundamentally changed. I used to think for the first half of my career that leadership was about making bold statements and, you know, leading from the front in that sort of Jack Welchy sort of way. Yeah. And I now think leadership is a much more intricate and soft skill, which is all about demonstrating your authenticity and giving others the opportunity to shine. So I think I like this concept almost of leading from behind. You've got to set the tone and demonstrate to people that you're on their side, and funny enough, then they'll start to follow you. Just grand speeches and, you know, eloquent statements of intent, you know, pretty superficial. Yeah. So I mean, my leadership style, if I've got one, has definitely evolved over time. I think I'm better at that now than I've ever been before, actually. I mean, everything else, you know, starts to fall off, but and also I've become a much more interesting student of people. You know, leadership is really about understanding people, I think, and my interest in other people has grown over the years, not diminished, which I think is useful.
And I know also during this period of time you were doing a lot of travel.
Yeah.
You know, it was very rare that you were at home for long periods of time, and it also coincided with your family growing. So you've got 6 children?
Yes, I have.
Yes.
I have. Yes.
And so you were under a lot of pressure work. You were under pressure trying to get the home work-life balance. I know that your wife worked as well, didn't she? So with a big stress surrounding a lot of this time. Is that something that you can deal with well? Were you able to compartmentalize as and when you were in different roles, or at home, or in a different country?
I think I probably wasn't particularly good at it. I think that I know there's a sort of a glamour attached in some people's minds to business travel, which I completely understand. If you're doing it all the time, you don't realize how tired you're getting. If you're in different time zones all the time, your body clock is completely messed up. And I would definitely, I remember I used to go to Australia sometimes for a week and come back. You know, you'd fly on Saturday night and come back on Friday or Saturday morning, and, you know, just be a zombie for the weekend. It's not a sensible place to be, and it's not a sensible way to live, I don't think. So, you know, that would be the odd trip to Europe is quite nice, but I think when you're doing it all the time, it's not great.
Yeah. Is that why you decided to move on from EY? Was it?
No.
I know you did some really positive stuff when you were at EY, particularly around the branding exercise, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I was there 10 years, and frankly, 10 years is just enough, you know. But there were things that I did that I was quite proud of. We had 2 goes at developing and embedding a firm-wide purpose, arguably slightly earlier than it became. I mean, now it's terribly fashionable, isn't it? Everybody's doing it. Yeah. The first one failed because we didn't get the global board on side. The second one Building a Better Working World has taken root. And alongside that, we changed the visual identity system, which sounds, really easy, but I promise you, in an organization like EY, it's a massive. So that was good. We did some really interesting work in the thought leadership space as well. I mean, what the beauty about organizations like EY is they have fantastic reach. So we did a lot of work with the World Economic Forum, and I was quite proud of some of the intellectual property we developed actually around this idea of EY genuinely believed they were a more global organization. They were structured in a more global way, and therefore we were creating content that tried to demonstrate our globality. This is largely pre the financial crash, and globalization was seemed to be a force for good in those days. So there was some good stuff there, but I found the size of that organization quite alienating, I think. And 10 years was definitely enough.
You were ready
to
have
done anymore.
Yeah. And then you set up your own consultancy for a period of time.
Well, I'm not a consultant. I'm not a natural consultant. I think what I tend to do is I tend to consult around what I've learned in my last job. So it sort of has a shelf life. You do it. You could do it for a couple of years, and then when you've run out of things to say, you have to go and get another job. Really, I don't think I'm a natural consultant, but I really enjoy it because it's I've done it 2 or 3 times. It's sort of me and a PC and nothing else. So there's no infrastructure. There's no other people. It's tremendous freedom actually to do that. And I did some really interesting work with it. One
projects.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah.
And then you decided to move to Simmons & Simmons.
Yes.
What was the thought process behind that?
Well, one of my consulting jobs was with a small but lovely law firm, and I really liked the people I was working with there. I like lawyers. I know they're not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, but actually they're really good with words, and I'm interested in words, not particularly interested in numbers, I have to say, and therefore I felt that they were people that I would enjoy spending time with. The other thing that really fascinated me about Simmons, well, there are 2 things. One, I loved its size. I still love its size. The big organizations are very, very unwieldy, and Simmons it's not a small organization. It's probably a $500 million revenue organization, but that's
more agile.
Yeah, much more agile. And also the brilliant thing about the legal industry is from a marketing and BD perspective, there's a hell of a lot to go for. It's not a greenfield site. I mean, it's maturing, but it's, you work at Coca-Cola or in Unilever, you can spend 5 years there and all you'll do is change the Pantone color on, something, and that'll be it, because it's all set. Now, I'm sure anybody working at Unilever would kill me for saying that, but there's so much room to create change, in the legal industry, and Simmons, was ripe for new ideas.
And how did you find the change there? Because you'd not worked within a law firm before. You had worked in partnerships, but not in a law firm. How did you adapt?
It really easily. Well, no, that's not fair. The challenge is you don't know much about the law, so you don't really understand very much about the products and services that are being offered. So I guess that's not ideal. But you don't have to go through this transition from PLC to partnership. That's the massive cultural change, and I'd got there
that previously. Yeah.
So I didn't find it particularly difficult. I mean, I also deliberately, spent quite a lot of time just listening, not making any big changes early, because you need to understand what's going on. You need to sniff the culture of a place and understand how it works before you start, doing anything. I think sometimes people just try and move too fast and they make mistakes. Just take a look at Liz Truss for recent example.
And so I know that trust is incredibly important to you, both with your teams and also with your managing partner as well. How do you go about building that trust with people, and how much ability do you give them to be autonomous, and how strong does that working relationship need to be for you to be successful?
Well, there's a lot of questions in there. I mean, on the trust thing, I think trust is developed by two things. Probably one, demonstrating through your actions that you're trustworthy. I mean, it sounds like stating the bleeding obvious, but it's really important that you're authentic. That doesn't mean you're a pushover. It doesn't mean you're not going to make hard decisions, but it means that you have a set of beliefs and a way of operating that seem to have a basis of justice and fairness in them. That doesn't even mean you have to agree with other people, or other people have to agree with you. So that's the first thing. I think the other thing about trust in a commercial context is you have to demonstrate that you can do certain things.
Yeah.
You know, you have to be credible, not in every part of your job, but in some parts of your job, to build trust, I think. That would be my view on that question. I think there may have been some other questions in there as well, Nikki, which I've already forgotten.
So how about the relationship piece? Because you must give people autonomy, and you must be given autonomy. So how much of that do you allow before you step in?
Yes. My view is the more autonomy you give people, the more they will feel liberated and increase their enjoyment of what they do. So I would always default to letting them go and go and go. And I don't even care if people make mistakes, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice if they learn from their mistakes, and it's nice if they tell you, they don't shuffle.
And not keep making the same mistakes. That's the big thing, isn't it? Just say, learn, don't do it again.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of managing, upwards, in terms of managing people that are your boss, I think you have to speak the truth to power. And I think you have to have the guts to do that, and you have to do it in the right way. You can't just default to picking an argument every time you're going to have a dialogue with them. You have to work out what's really important to you in the battles you want to fight, but you have to demonstrate you're also fundamentally on their side, and that's, I think, how you build a trusting relationship. I don't think my, the boss I had, well, I still have actually until tomorrow evening at Simmons, thought that I was anything other than 100% loyal to and supportive of Simmons. But there were issues around which I would be quite honest with him, where we had differences of point of view. I didn't always win the argument, let's be honest. But I think you've got to be brave enough to speak your mind in the right way at the right time.
Yeah, I think it's some good.
But you've also got to deliver. You've got to be able to do the job.
I think that's incredibly important, as you say. You're not going to be around for long, particularly in a law firm.
No,
you get found out pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's right.
And as you mentioned, tomorrow's your last day with the firm. What's next for you? Well,
the first thing to say is I'm absolutely useless at these interregnum periods in between roles. I've never been that good at it, I don't think. The only thing I've decided is I know I want to carry on working. I just know that I don't want to stop. And I will be very Catholic about my tastes in terms of where I go and what I do. I'd be really happy to do another role in a law firm. I'd be really happy to work not on a permanent basis, work in different ways, but I'd be happy equally to go and look at something completely different. So I'm going through that process, now.
Thinking process, which is always challenging, isn't it?
Yeah,
so you've achieved a lot in your career, and there's been periods of time where I know, as you said, you've struggled through some harder times. How have you managed to get through those and become stronger and able to wake up the next day and carry on again?
Well, so I've had 3 or 4 bouts of what I think I would call really hard mental times where I've suffered quite deep bouts of depression, actually. I mean, I haven't had one for 30 years, ironically. They were when I was younger. And this is the sort of depression where you just wake up in the morning and you're incredibly happy bunny the night before, and your whole world has collapsed. You don't know why. It's not to do with the fact that you didn't get that salary rise, or you didn't get, that promotion, or you split up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. It's just, I think, some chemical imbalance in your brain that knocks you for six. And so I have a lot of sympathy with people that suffer those forms of mental and other forms of mental ill health.
Yeah.
I do, however, slightly worry about the way the debate about mental health is going now. I worry that we conflate in this, this desire for mental wellness, a sort of belief that everybody can live this perfect sort of life. I mean, there's
Instagram life, isn't it? Everyone looks perfect on the outside.
Yeah. So but I'm very sympathetic to significant mental illness. I think it's awful, and I wish that there was more being done about it.
Yeah, it must have been very frightening as well for you and your family, I'm sure, at the time.
Well, at the time, it was a long time ago, actually. There was really no help, and it certainly wasn't talked about. So you just had to get on with it, which is hard.
Thankfully, times have changed, and the support there, as you've mentioned, which is real positive.
Yes.
So how has it been for you over the years, being able to balance this work life? And again, the word balance seems a little bit strange, doesn't it? Because I know at times, I think one of the things that you've said to me at times is sometimes that your job or your career or your role does have to come first, and other times there may be something going on in the family that needs to come first. How have you really been able to make that work for you and your family and your roles? Because they've all been big roles, these roles that you've had.
Well, there were times where it was really difficult, actually. And I think the mistake, you can make is that it's all one thing or all the other. I do think that the world has moved on and in a good way, and people now recognize the need to balance those periods of your life or even your year when you really have to be working awfully hard. And I do believe that's important, with periods of time when you can back off and you can devote a bit more time to other parts of your life. And I do think that if you're ambitious, you need to put work first sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think equally, you need to put other things first at other times. And it's getting that balance right that I think is important. And I didn't always get it right. I fully admit that.
I think it's a hard thing to get right.
Yeah.
What does success look like for you then, Eddie? Because you've in your sort of role, and you particularly when you're leading teams, I know that you really enjoy seeing your team succeed. And as you mentioned, stepping to a more leadership from a management role, it is more about that, isn't it? So what is success for you? What does it look like?
In a work capacity, God, I mean, I think now I like to think I get my kicks vicariously through other people. So I don't now need titles or positions or any of that stuff anymore. And that's quite liberating, because it actually means you can devote your time just to help others succeed. I know that sounds horribly cliched, and I certainly didn't do it for the first half of my working life. I was climbing up the greasy pole, but now I really get my kicks out of trying to help other people. And if you help other people and you devote your time to other people, fun enough, things seem to go well. Things seem to go well for you if you're more focused on others, seems to me, which is a revelation that came to me probably too late in my working career.
And you get a lot of enjoyment from that, which is
very
important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So what about the highlights of your career? What would you say they have been, they are?
Oh God. There were periods of my time at Ogilvy were brilliant, largely because of the eclectic group of people that I was working with that used to make me laugh. That would be one. I think my time at Anderson was extraordinary. I lived through one of the biggest corporate scandals of the last 100 years, the decline and fall of Anderson, and that was actually, I know this sounds ridiculous, it was a privilege to be engaged in that, because I've never experienced anything like that before or since. And I've really enjoyed my time at Simmons. I feel as though I've been able to get a handle around the organization and contribute in a significant way. And that's really fulfilling in a way that I couldn't at EY. EY was just too big a beast. So I'd pick those out, I think.
Great highlights. And challenges for you. You mentioned imposter syndrome earlier on as well. So has that held you back at any stage?
Yes, I'm sure it has. Yes, I think believing in yourself is quite important. As long as it doesn't bleed into arrogance, I think it's really important. Self-belief. I've probably got more of it now than I had 25 years ago. That's probably held me back. Yeah, definitely. And I think also I was put into a couple of roles when I was just too young, frankly.
Yeah.
I wasn't capable, doing them very well.
It's funny, isn't it, that sometimes it's the experience that gives you the knowledge, and almost you want to turn your career upside down, don't you?
Yes.
To start with what you've learned now. It'd be amazing. And what about words of wisdom then from you? What would you say to Eddie when he was starting out off at Wimpy?
Yes, at Wimpy, flipping burgers. Yeah. Well, I think, and my children laugh at me because they will have heard this so many times, I actually think the most important requirement for success in life is tenacity. One of my children's sitting in the kitchen with me and she's just laughed.
She's nodding.
She's nodding. Everybody has the ability, I think what stands people apart is their ability to pick themselves up and to keep on going. So I'm all for tenacity. I also think there are two other things. I think, desire to learn is really important. Inquisitiveness, in other words, is really important. And a degree of humility. I think if you've got those three things, you're going to do stuff that's interesting. That would be my view.
And being open, I think, is really important, isn't it? I think, you and I have talked quite a bit about curiosity and as you say, to go into different situations and scenarios with an open mind and just thinking, what can I learn this time?
Yes.
Not thinking that everybody knows everything about.
Yes, I agree.
Out there.
Completely. Yeah.
So important.
What else would I say? I think the other thing is, this is a terrible thing to say, particularly in the world in which we exist now. But if you can not worry about the money, but worry about seeking opportunity, the money will come.
Yeah.
I worry, one of my observations about the legal sector and M&BD within the legal sector is that there's too much chasing the $5,000, the $5,000 extra. And there's not enough chasing a rich experience, which is going to give you 50 grand later. And I think people get that wrong sometimes. That actually don't think your profession helps, I have to say. I wish people would pursue with rigor and desire new opportunity, and I promise you the other benefits that you need will follow. But do it that way around, not the other way around.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I think a lot of the time we do find, particularly now, with some of the younger generation and cohorts of workers, there is this demand for what's next all the time, and it's whether it's salary, whether it's a job title, and as very rightly as you say, you do a job and do it really well, and opportunities will always come to you, won't they? And they'll always be there and always be available, and you will be offered more. So it's about, really, to me, it's about always putting your best self forward. You mentioned earlier on about authenticity. I think that's incredibly important as well, to bring your best self to work, to be authentic, and just to get your head down and work hard. And hopefully that makes a big difference. Fantastic. Well, I have to say, Eddie, thank you so much for your time today. I've really, really enjoyed speaking to you. I think there's some great insights that have come out of our conversation today. And I'm very excited to see what is the next stage of your career.
Yes, so am I.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks
Eddie.
very much, Nikki. Bye.